Breathedge is a survival game developed by Red Ruin Software, which attempts to carve a niche for itself by blending the grimness of space with quirky humor. The strange thing about this attempt is that it's both a hit and miss. While it has some moments of charm and creativity, it also creates many boring moments which could have been avoided. First of all, the Ultrawide. If you just switch to 21:9 or god forbid 32:9, the game will zoom in and become essentially unplayable. Luckily, the Steam forums offer a very simple fix which is super easy and solves all problems instantly. Why the dev couldn't just implement this on their own is beyond me. One look at Breathedge's trailer was enough for me to know that I really wanted to play it. Everything shown reminded me of the first Subnautica. 30 hours later, I can confidently say that my first impression was absolutely correct. From the game loop, which involves exploring and scanning things in order to unlock blueprints, which then in turn allow you to explore even further, to the management of air and even base building, everything felt extremely familiar. We even have a talkative AI to assist us and a silent protagonist. In fact, the aforementioned AI talks quite a lot, and I really enjoyed listening to its monologues when I could understand them properly. The reason for that being that our companion simply speaks way too quickly. It speaks so fast that you often have a hard time following at all. In addition to that, even the subtitles are fast. They will simply disappear as soon as the AI is done talking. Your only option is to open a menu and check the chat history where you can read what was said in peace. The game's most notable feature is its humor, which at times may be childish and quite idiotic, but I still somehow loved it. Breathedge places the player in the role of a bumbling astronaut navigating a labyrinth of space wreckage and several other environmental hazards. The dark and satirical comedy constantly veers into the realm of absurdity. Besides the many fun cultural references, there were quite a few very original jokes which were introduced as part of the gameplay. One example of this is when the game asks you to lower the radiation, and one of the steps is introduced as an innovative scientific method, and as you finally discover it, you are essentially presented with a description which tells you to open the game's menu and untick a special setting there. This is just one of many such examples, by the way. Graphically, Breathedge offers a visually striking and detailed representation of outer space, complete with breathtaking cosmic vistas. However, the interiors of the spacecrafts and stations lack the same level of polish, with textures and character animations often appearing stiff and awkward. The overall visual presentation feels inconsistent because of this. While the comic book style graphics work well for certain aspects of the game, they don't feel entirely cohesive. The game's music is really nice, but some effects are very loud for no reason. Whenever we move on an environment with gravity, our steps sound like someone's banging a large pan with a giant spoon. At first, there aren't that many such environments, but as you go further through the story, this happens more and more often and quickly became an annoyance to me. The gameplay in Breathedge is built around a typical survival formula with a space twist. Players scavenge resources, craft items, and maintain their oxygen levels in the harsh vacuum of space. And while these mechanics can be very engaging, they're often bogged down by a lack of variety and sometimes frustrating inventory management system. The game leans heavily on the crafting aspects, but the recipes are often convoluted and lack intuitive explanations. This can lead to a sense of tedium and frustration as players are left guessing how to progress. Additionally, the reliance on resource collection and constant oxygen management might appeal to hardcore survival fans, such as myself, but it can also deter players who seek a more well-rounded and accessible gaming experience. Still, when compared to games like Subnautica, I can confidently say that Breathedge is quite a bit easier, so if you're worried about that, let me dispel those fears. However, the game involves a lot of backtracking, which can be very boring when you're doing it in space. There simply isn't that much to see here, and at times it's a pain to do it. Later on, base building comes into play, but it's a huge pain as well because it simply isn't nearly as versatile, as interesting, or as engaging as it was in other games. Thinking about Subnautica again. In addition to that, it's expensive to do, so more often than not you will choose to travel instead of trying to build a base closer to your current objective. It's important to also note that this game will at times try to invoke a sense of dread within the player, but unlike the first Subnautica, where fear becomes more and more common as you dive deeper into the ocean, here it never really manages to set in at all. The narrative is where Breathedge falters the most. The story starts with a promising premise. Here's an astronaut who's stuck in outer outer space and is caught up in a series of bizarre and often absurd events. However, as the plot unfolds, it becomes increasingly incoherent and disconnected. There's a mishmash of pop culture references that sometimes feel out of place, and the narrative lacks depth and consistency. The lack of compelling overarching goal or a clear sense of direction leaves players feeling adrift, much like the protagonist in Space. The game's voice acting is another sore point. While the occasional witty line is delivered well, the overall voice work is hit or miss, with some characters coming off as grating and annoying. This detracts from the immersion and overall enjoyment of the experience. One of the most critical issues with Breathedge is its pacing. The game's lack of clear objectives or guidance often leaves players wandering aimlessly through space, searching for anything to do. Without a strong sense of purpose, it's easy to lose interest in the game and grow frustrated with its lack of direction. Some players may enjoy the open-ended exploration, but for those looking for a more guided experience, Breathedge can feel like a disjointed series of disconnected events and challenges. For me, as someone who could describe himself as a veteran of survival games, this type of gameplay is absolutely okay, and I felt like I was in a very natural environment, but to a new player it may be a turnoff. We mustn't forget that there are some kind of indicators and objectives, and you can see them on all over the recorded footage, which will tell you where to go, and then you can figure out what more or less is needed of you in most cases, but it doesn't feel like it's a story that really guides you. In conclusion, Breathedge has moments of humor and creativity which are great, but it also suffers from some serious weaknesses. The game's attempts to fuse humor with survival elements results in a somewhat uneven experience. The disjointed narrative, subpar voice acting, and lack of direction could scare off less experienced players, but if you pass that initial hurdle, you will be able to enjoy a very entertaining adventure with the occasional boring sections within it. The game offers a unique take on space survival and is a great option if you just finished the first Subnautica but want to save yourself the trouble of playing the terrible second part. While it's definitely not as good, Breathedge will still scratch that itch and keep you entertained for around 30 hours easily. With that having been said, I want to thank you for watching Game Filter. This is Nino signing out. Have a great day.